Welcome to the Queer Conversation podcast, brought to you by Lotl Media, a show where we discuss all things queer. I am your host, Silke Bader, a publisher and producer in the LGBTQI space in Australia for the past 30 years. From medicine and media to politics and activism, Dr. Kerryn Phelps shares her remarkable life of change-making. First in her family to complete high school, first in her family to go to university, first in her teaching hospital to have a part-time medical resident position, first female doctor reporting on health issues on Australian television, first same-sex couple to talk about marriage equality and same-sex parenting in Australia, first woman to lead the AMA, first woman and first independent to represent the federal electorate of Wentworth, first openly LGBT plus woman to be elected to the House of Representatives. Welcome to Queer Conversation. In the studio with me today is Dr. Kerryn Phelps. Hi, Kerryn. How are you going?
Hi, Silke. Nice to see you.
You just recently published a book, Power of Balance, and it sort of talks us through your life of the last kind of 30 years, your challenges, your struggles, the triumphs across a variety of areas you've been involved with in regards to LGBT activism, to health, medicine, and politics. In your book, we're talking about the power of language, and I was wondering, you were talking about that. When they outed you, they referred to you as partners versus wife or commitment ceremony versus marriage.
Well, there wasn't a language for our relationships. There wasn't a language for the people who were important in our lives at that time. So if you had a partner at that time, because there was no formal recognition by marriage, you couldn't call your partner your wife. So we basically decided to adopt the language and use the language, and that was kind of a way of getting people used to not only hearing the words when it applied to two women being together or two men being together, but it also meant that people saw our relationships with an equivalence to the ones that they were familiar with in terms of a mixed gender marriage. And so that was, I guess, one of the beginnings of that thinking, but also there were no words at that time for the relationships of our extended families. So step-parent, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law, because there was no legal recognition of those relationships. And so it was really, I guess, something that Jackie and I consciously decided to do was to adopt the language and use it so that there was seen to be an equivalence for our relationships even before there was legal recognition.
Exactly, that was the language where you're intruding into the heterosexual norm, and what made it so confronting for society, I think. Do you look back and what are your thoughts? Are you happy that you stood your ground there? I mean, it was a battle, right?
It was an enormous battle. I have to say there were a lot of critics and there were a lot of people who really objected, particularly on religious grounds, to us taking those words, wedding, marriage, wife, and using them for same-sex relationships. But by the same token, there were other people who it was almost like you switched a light on and they got behind us and they got behind the concept of recognition of our relationships. And at the time when we were outed, Jackie and I really did face a choice about whether we stepped forward into the light and spoke about some of the discrimination that LGBTQI plus community was facing at that time. And a lot of us didn't even realize the extent to which that discrimination was happening in things like adoption law, in things like superannuation, in things like across a range of, I think there were 85 federal laws that were changed under Kevin Rudd's prime ministership. And so it was a process of a whole lot of issues that needed to be addressed over time. And marriage equality became the beacon issue. It became the vanguard, if you like, for those other areas of discrimination, because when we talked about equivalence, when we talked about equality, any area of discrimination or inequality was no longer acceptable. And so that was a long and complicated journey, but it was one that was really guided by the marriage equality movement.
I tried to find a quote that I really loved in the book, and I'm sure you remember it. And it refers back for being a change maker like you are, and the responsibility that we have in making the world a better place.
You're talking about the words tikkun olam, the responsibility to heal the world?
That summed the whole book up. Your passion for change and for equality and making the world a better place with the reach that you ended up having. It's really quite incredible to look at your life of the last 30 years, what you have achieved. And I gotta ask, where do you think you actually did the most impact? I mean, you made so much impact in so many different areas.
Thank you for saying that. Look, one of the things about looking back over my life, that, as you say, that there was this overarching theme of trying to achieve balance where there was imbalance. And inequality is a form of imbalance. And I guess one of the places that started for me was in being one of the first doctors working in the media, so being a health communication pioneer, changing the way that we looked at the balance between doctors and patients, and so that it was a more equal balance of knowledge, that people were able to go to their doctor armed with more information. And I did that through my work in television, radio, newspapers and magazines, where there weren't doctors who were out there talking about things at that time. And so that was really something that I'm very proud to have been able to be involved with at the time, and to forge a path that hadn't been really forged before. And I could also say that the media organisations that I worked with throughout that time were very supportive of what I was doing, but I did have quite a few battles behind the scenes when I was dealing with certain subject matter. And so, it was just a matter of actually crossing boundaries constantly to find out, how much further we needed to go to achieve that balance I was seeking. I guess one of the other areas is in medical politics, and I saw through my work in the media that the health system needed some work, and that's kind of a work in progress, a bit like housework, and it's never done. But certainly at that stage there was a lot that needed to be better in the health system, and I saw that going into medical politics was a way of achieving that change. And so being elected as the first female president of the Australian Medical Association was an opportunity to be able to put in place a whole lot of policies, in particular for your audience, the first ever AMA policy on gender and sexuality as discrimination as health issues. There were also issues around things like refugee health, climate change and human health, bioterrorism, a whole range of other issues that I was able to talk about and to get some action on, alongside of the sort of typical, if you like, industrial kind of issues for a professional organisation. And then moving along to obviously marriage equality, that was a 20-year battle from 1998 through to 2017, when there we were in Parliament after that long battle, surrounded by all the wonderful people who had helped to make that happen, and supported by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of others who got behind the campaign, and to see that vote go through. And a year after that, I was unexpectedly elected to Parliament. And the reason for that was because I saw again the need for change in our politics. Our political landscape was a mess at the time. The Liberals had ousted Malcolm Turnbull, and I happened to have a practice in his electorate. And people started asking me if I would run. I really didn't think I had any chance of winning, but I thought it was a great opportunity to be able to talk about the things that needed to change. And, as history will now show, I won that election and was able to go forward and spearhead the Medevac legislation, which was aimed at a humanitarian approach to people in indefinite offshore detention on Manus Island and Nauru. And so, I guess those are some of the highlights of what is now a long career.
Now talk about the title of the book. You are playing with words, the power of balance. What did that mean to you?
Well, Power of Balance was a name that came to me around about the time that I was first elected to Parliament in 2018 in that by-election in Wentworth. And I kept being asked by journalists about what it might be like to have the balance of power. And within a couple of days of me arriving in Parliament, the crossbench of which I was a part actually had the balance of power, which is a political term for the government was in minority and they needed the support of the crossbench to be able to pass any legislation. What it also meant was that I was able to bring forward that legislation I talked about, the Medivac legislation, to provide humanitarian assistance to people in indefinite offshore detention at the time. And so in thinking about the balance of power, I thought to myself, that really puts the emphasis on the power part of the equation, whereas I guess my life's work has really been more about balance. And so I decided to flip that concept over on its head from balance of power to call my book The Power of Balance, because it really is about the power that you can as an individual, as a community, as a wider world have if we have more balance in all areas of our life. And that goes to social justice, it goes to equality, it goes to humanitarian issues. And so that's where the name came from. And it actually came to me in a flash when I was paddleboarding out on Sydney Harbour and thinking about balance and thinking about staying afloat. And that's where I thought that balance was really the issue.
Why did you write a book now?
Well, I suppose you could say when is the right time to write a book. I think it's an important punctuation mark in my life. At that time, I had some time on my hands to be able to put the work into it and go through I'm a bit of an archiver myself, and so I had collected clippings, letters, cards, emails, newspaper articles, magazine articles over the years, made notes, journals, and so it takes time to go through those things. And I actually had the time to not only go through those from a fact basis, but also spend some time reflecting. And it was a time when I started working on this, where COVID had hit in early 2020. We started having those lockdowns, and I started working on another project which was about health communication around COVID and what it was meaning to people's health and to their lives and the political responses to that. And so I became quite involved in that as well. Excuse me. But I think why the time, it's a punctuation mark in my life, in my career. I don't know what that punctuation mark is at this stage, but it gave me the time to reflect and time to do the work.
When I finished the book, I walked away really thinking or really knowing what a unique, game-changing person and personality you are, and how good you have done for Australia. And people need to know about this and about your work. And I guess not only about your work, but also the people around you who have supported you. And, there is a community who is behind you and the change that you'd like to inflict. And is that what you wanted to achieve with the book? Or do you have another agenda why you've written the book?
It was really about telling a story, telling a history. It was also about inspiring other people to make change themselves, to be leaders in the areas where they have a passion, to talk about the principles of leadership and what that means. And I think it's really important that, certainly in the case of women in particular, that they're quite often ignored by history. And I think it's important that we do write first-person accounts of experiences. And it's not just about telling that story, but it's also about the lessons or the inspiration that other people might get from the struggles that you have faced or that I faced. And to be able to say, well, there are strategies around making change. There are strategies around personal transformation, around political transformation, and there are obviously different people will go about things in a different way. But I talk about my particular way of going about things, and it hasn't always been a formulated plan at the beginning. Sometimes you have to just kind of make it up as you go along, because things happen that are unexpected. And the important thing is that you do build your skill set from right throughout your life. I believe in lifelong learning. And so building your skill set, building your knowledge base, being abreast of current events, both locally, nationally, but also internationally, and understanding the kind of landscape that you're working in, that's really important, whether it's a small organisation, a larger organisation, or a very large organisation. I think the principles are quite often the same. And I think it's, as you say, the people around you are so very important. And I have in the book, you'll see that I don't just talk about what I did, what I was thinking, what I was feeling, but I talk about the advisors that I had along the way, the advice that they gave me, what I did with that advice, the importance of supporters, the importance of a movement, things like the medical profession. I had to have the doctors in the profession backing me up, but I also had to make a case to the people in Australia that the change that we were proposing as the medical profession was something that was going to benefit them as patients. And so that communication piece is really important. When it came to marriage equality, when Jackie and I started out talking about marriage equality back in 1998, there wasn't anyone else talking about that particular issue at the time. There were a lot of people who had been working for many years on equality issues, but there were quite disparate voices, and it was really important to actually bring that all together and to have everybody speaking with the same voice, with an agenda, and being able to be heard. And so it kind of changed the narrative, if you like, having two women talking about marriage, talking about same-sex parenting, talking about same-sex adoption, talking about the importance of family recognition and all of these things. And as time went by, the marriage equality movement was set up after a bit of time, and I describe how that all happened. And then more and more people came on board, more and more resources were applied to it, because people saw this as a vanguard issue for LGBTQI plus equality in Australia and recognition.
This is really something that needs to be recorded and preserved and shown to the next generation.
Well, fun fact, Lesbians on the Loose was one of the first cover shots that we did after we came out. You've probably got that photo somewhere, and I was absolutely delighted to be able to speak to the magazine at the time and to give one of our first interviews to them.
Well, you've always been a big supporter of Loddle, so thank you for that. But as a good activist, there is no stopping you. You and Jackie, you had bad reactions to the COVID vaccine.
I've written parliamentary submissions about vaccine injury, about long COVID and repeated infections, and those were opportunities to be able to talk about the perspective of the COVID pandemic from the point of view not only of doctors and public health, but also from the personal stories of people affected by the vaccine in an adverse way. And that's a very important story, because there are many people who have been affected. And in the book I talk about, it's quite a long chapter, I talk about the beginnings, the very beginnings, and then some of the history of what happened internationally, nationally, and then personally, and sort of drill down into where things went wrong, where things went right, and where we need to go from here. But I think that's obviously a work in progress, what's happening with the COVID pandemic, because a lot of people think it's gone away, but it's still very much around and going to be affecting people's health for a long time into the future.
Thank you, Kerryn, very much for talking to us. Really appreciate it. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. It was a really great insight in an activist's life. And so thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Silke, and thank you for all the work you've done over the years.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, or Facebook using the tag @LottleMedia, or head over to our website lotl.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.